here. Today we'll be talking about the Huawei Nova 9, Huawei's latest mid-range smartphone. If you think it looks familiar, well, yeah. This is due to it being basically a clone of the Honor 50, but with a few differences. Yes, before you ask, it does lack GMS. But with a workaround, we basically got most of Google's apps running. Now let's start with the specifications. The Nova 9 uses a Snapdragon 778G 4G chipset. Nope, you did not read that wrong. It's 4G, not 5G. This is due to the sanctions the American government imposed on Huawei, where Huawei's phones are basically off limits to 5G chipsets. Hence, all of Huawei's phones will be at this point limited to just 4G. If later on the sanctions were to be loosened, we would most likely see 5G phones from Huawei. But for now, this is it. Other specifications include 8GB of RAM, 256GB of storage, EMUI 12, Wi-Fi AX, Bluetooth 5, USB Type-C, dual nano SIM slot, a 4300 mAh battery, and 66W supercharge. As for the Nova 9's display, it uses a 6.57-inch OLED display with 120Hz refresh rate and 100% DCI-P3. In general, it's pretty much the same beautified display as the Honor 50. Fast, vibrant, and high contrast. Just like me. Seeing that it's basically a clone of the Honor 50, almost everything is the same. But what I can spot is that the camera is thinner and you have less one mic hole on top. This is one of the main differences between the Nova 9 and the Honor 50. Instead of a 108MP lens, it is actually a 50MP lens. But this is not actually a downgrade. More on this later. The Huawei Nova 9 comes with a 50MP ultra-vision camera with a 152-inch sensor, an f1.9 aperture, RYYB color filter array, and Huawei XD Fusion. It also has an 8MP f2.2 aperture 120° field of view 17mm ultra-wide lens, a 2MP f2.4 macro lens, and a 2MP f2.4 depth sensor. So about this 50MP lens and why I would say it is unlikely to be a downgrade, let's have our main man Vincent Chan talk about it.
Sure, Marshmallow Man. If I may, I would also like to add that some of the best smartphone camera sensors are actually the 50MP ones instead of the 108MP ones. While there has always been the confusion that higher resolution means better images, you might have noticed that some of the most premium flagships use 50MP sensors. Why? Well, with most of the premium 50MP sensors, like the one in the Huawei Nova 9, you get larger pixels. Larger pixels are able to capture more light, which means more data and more details in your images. A common analogy is to think of the pixels on a camera sensor as buckets. The larger the bucket, the more water, or in this case, light, you're able to capture. Not to mention that the Huawei Nova 9's 50MP Ultra Vision sensor uses a RYYB color filter, which promises to improve light sensitivity by 40%, which is a pretty big deal. This much better light capturing ability will allow you to drop the ISO for cleaner shots or increase the shutter speed to freeze motion. This opens up avenue for more creative shots depending on what you want to do with your shot. So yeah, just because it is a 50MP sensor doesn't mean that you're getting less for your money. Even Samsung themselves make some really great 50MP sensors, with the latest ISOCELL GN2 being a behemoth measuring it at 1 by 1.12 inch with huge 1.4 micron pixels that give you the effective 2.8 micron pixels when you take pixel binning into the equation. While one smartphone may give you a 108MP camera and the other gives you a 50MP one, the sensors themselves are actually very different and you may get much better results with the 50MP one, with all things being equal. And of course, with Huawei's experience in imaging, you can expect Huawei to take full advantage of the 50MP sensor's benefits. Back to you, Marshmallow Man.
Thanks, Vin. With all that, let's see how well the Nova 9's camera performs. Let's start with an outdoor shot. The image is sharp and has very well balanced colors. The image is untouched and we did not notice any color overpowering the other. It is no surprise since Nova 9 comes with an RYYB color filter. Since its ability is more prominent, it is more powerful in low light. Let's check out some low light shots. These shots were taken in Sanwe Giza. For those who haven't been there, it has a well lit outdoor area. perfect for testing out low light shots. Oh, we also tested out the zoom function, which is an 8 megapixel wide angle lens by the way. The lack of resolution and slight oversaturation is present. Here's the 50 megapixel shot. In this shot you can see that the color remains vibrant and the image remains sharp. Here's a 2x zoom in. Notice that the pillar's edge is sharp, but this is basically just a digital zoom, so we have to manage our expectations. Here's a 10x zoom. These shots won't be winning any awards. Let's try another shot. These shots here are taken near Bangsa Village Mall. Here's a wide angle. Here's a normal shot. Here's a 2x zoom and 10x zoom. It also has a 2 megapixel macro camera. Just like the Honor 50, this camera is more or less just for show. I would avoid using it since the image came out with smudgy edges. At least the color is still okay. Again, the 50 megapixel is the show stealer here. Check out these images. The Nova 9 also has a high res mode. Guess which image is shot by the high res mode? If you guess right, you're, well, right. Let's zoom in 100% to see the difference. The full zoom in high res mode still retains most of its details. Pretty neat and useful for those who take their photo shooting seriously. If you enjoyed the video so far, please consider liking this video. It will mean a lot to us. The Nova 9 is capable of shooting 4K video with EIS enabled. While the colors are well recreated here, it is quite visible that the data rate is having a hard time to catch up. Notice the shadow in this background. It is degraded. This is likely because, while recording, the Nova 9 does not have enough horsepower to handle the bitrate. Checking back the video, this video has 38 megabits per second worth of data, while the recommended bitrate to have for 4K video is at least 44 megabits per second. Say megabits per second 2 times faster. Megabits per second. Checking back the video, this video has 38 megabits per second worth of data, while the recommended bitrate to have for 4K video is at least 44 megabits per second. But when you move to an area with lesser dynamics, it turns out just okay. Just don't zoom in. The EIS of Nova 9 is implemented properly. There's less of a wobbling effect, but if you have a lot of movement, it feels like we're walking drunk. The Huawei Nova 9 uses EMUI 12 as the main OS. As we all know by now, the EMUI OS is laced with layers of Harmony OS in there. While still remaining snappy, we already confirmed that Harmony OS 2.0 will be coming soon. Yes, we're still on HMS here, but fear not. In a moment, we will show you how to use GMS exclusive apps on the Nova 9. EMUI's, well, UI is very similar at this point with the Harmony OS. Things like App Gallery and other Huawei components are all available at this point. We made a separate video about the gaming capacity of the Nova 9, and what we can say is that you will not face any lags or stuttering issues with the Nova 9 even if you crank the settings up. Check out our Nova 9 gaming video at the link on top, or below. The only caveat here is the placement of the speaker. It gets blocked when you hold the phone horizontally. So yes, we have the App Gallery, the main app store for Huawei mobile phones. Here you will find most of the apps, but not all you're familiar with. GMS exclusive apps are apps in here. You can install an app called G-Space, where you will gain access to all Google Play Store and its entourage of apps. G-Space functions as a sandbox mode, where the GMS apps runs on top of it. Yes, there's ads in between, but none last. It is the simplest and most viable GMS option I have experienced so far. Let's run some Google apps on it. We'll skip Gmail and Google Search, as those generally have a workaround and our test shows it runs well here. Google Earth seems to run fine, and YouTube too. From what we know, Google Maps was reported to be unable to get a GPS position. Let's run it and see how it turns out. Let's not forget the multi-screen collaboration and Huawei Share that is exclusive to Huawei phones and its PC systems. It is very much present with the Huawei Nova 9, and it is among my favorite tools to use as a companion app for Maha. It is very much present with the Huawei Nova 9, and it is among my favorite tools to use as a companion app for MateBooks. The Huawei Nova 9 costs Rm1,999 with only an 8GB plus 250GB configuration. It puts the Huawei Nova 9 against many smartphones at this range. While yes, there are other choices out there, we believe the Huawei Nova 9 can put up quite a case, especially for Huawei ecosystem users. Let's get on to the positives, or what we like with the Nova 9. It has a solid camera, solid performance, top-notch display, Harmony OS entry point. Now, onto some of the things that we didn't like with the Huawei Nova 9. It lacks a telephoto lens, and it has a less than stellar performance in terms of macro photography. Its video lacks dynamic range, and the speaker gets blocked whenever you play games on it. So there you have it, our review of the Huawei Nova 9. As a closing though, we can say that the Nova 9 is at a tough spot against other smartphones at this price point. But its ecosystem does give it an upper hand, and GMS is kinda sorta solved with G-Space. If you find yourself interested in the Huawei Nova 9, do head over to the nearest Huawei experience store to try it out for yourself. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our channel for more videos and reviews like this. You can also check out the official PokdeLIVE Facebook and Instagram pages. We also have our very own Telegram channel where you can find all our news and videos posted every day. Until then, this is Marshmallow Man signing off. Hey everyone, Marshmallow Man here. Today we'll be talking about the Huawei Nova 9, Huawei's latest mid-range smartphone. If you think it looks familiar, well, yeah. This is due to it being basically a clone of the Honor 50, but with a few differences. Yes, before you ask, it does lack GMS. But with a workaround, we basically got...
Hello everyone, I hope you guys can hear me. So yeah, this is our 127th episode, and if you guys missed us last week, it's not your fault because we weren't live on Facebook last week. So we were live on YouTube, and unfortunately somehow I couldn't manage to stream to Facebook. So yeah, I think Kurt Stylo deserves a chance to win his prize. Last week we announced the winner for the MSI pen drive, which is right here. So yeah, if Kurt is still in the comments, please do leave a comment and make sure that we can see it so that, you know, we can process your prize. You make sure to PM us and then we'll process your prize, obviously. Suara Idris ke ni? Tak, ini suara Syed Hassan. Dia seorang lagi dalam tim kita. Tim kita ada 6 orang semuanya. Peluang kau? Well, since that you asked for it, I guess I have to do it anyway. So yeah, let's do this. You're the winner of this week's giveaway. So yeah, I would like to personally thank you for joining us on on YouTube. So yeah, thank you a lot for joining us on YouTube last week. So this is not exactly a random because I can't exactly run a randomizer on YouTube comments. I don't exactly know how yet. But yeah, we'll be sending you the fan. So yeah, I think we have a few prizes for you backdated. So yeah, we'll have to check back on that as well. I don't understand Japanese, Kurt Stylo. I don't understand Japanese. Anyway, so yeah, this week is gonna be a news recap. It's gonna be a fast one because I actually have some other stuff to review that I haven't gotten to yet. And yeah, let's get to it. So give me a moment, I need to set it up. So yeah, this was a part of last week's announcement. Last week's news recap, whereby the Samsung Galaxy S22 will come with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 in more regions, and that is something that I wasn't expecting because previously actually the Snapdragon were less available. I mean, they were available in Singapore, Korea, and the US if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, the Exynos was actually more prevalent. But now apparently for the next generation it's gonna be different, and it's probably gonna be quite a bad thing for Samsung fans because apparently according to quite a few rumors, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 or Snapdragon 898 or whatever you want to call the next gen Snapdragon it's gonna have worse performance than the Samsung Exynos 2200. So part of the reason is actually because of the manufacturing process, which is both of them on Samsung, but apparently the Exynos 2200 will be based on the Samsung's 4LPE process, while the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 will be Samsung's 4LPX process node. So the 4LPX process node is apparently based on the current Gen 5LPE process, which the current Snapdragon 888 is using. And I think we all know how hot the Snapdragon 888 can run. So yeah, next gen is apparently gonna be the same problem, but of course you do get a better improved performance, but with similar heating issues. But the Exynos 2200 will apparently be better, whereby it will be probably more efficient because of the process node. But yeah, that we have to see. And obviously this is a rumor, so don't take it at face value. Probably need to take it with a pinch of salt, as we say. So yeah, this is probably something that is very interesting to me, because it's quite interesting that Samsung decided to use the more advanced process from themselves, and then actually the process has limitations, which is probably why Qualcomm went with the 4LPX for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, and that's probably because the 4LPE process is apparently gonna be harder to get good yields out of. So obviously the Qualcomm wants to sell more Snapdragon 8 Gen 1s, so they decided to go with older but more mature process, which will give them better yields, or a more advanced process which will give them better results but not as good yields, so they have lesser chips to sell. So obviously I think Samsung is probably able to accept that, since it's their own chip and they're going to make their own phone. So, and obviously now I think the decision to go with less using the Exynos in fewer regions is probably partly because of the lower yields. So part of the yield problem apparently is also, aside from the process node itself, is also because of the RDNA 2 GPU, which will be powering the Exynos 2200. So I think you guys have probably seen that the Exynos 2200 is gonna feature the AMD RDNA 2 GPU architecture, which does seem very promising. I mean, it's stated to outperform the last gen by up to 50% in graphics, while also offering you features like ray tracing and stuff. So I think it is quite an interesting step up from the last gen. But yeah, apparently all of that combined gives you a pretty difficult chip to make, and on a new immature process node, I think it's even more difficult to make. But yeah, once again, we have to wait until Samsung actually announces the devices, and we have to confirm like which chipset are we getting in Malaysia, whether we will be getting the Snapdragon version or the Exynos version. And yeah, but I think we should get to that in a little bit more as we go on to the next next news, which is the Malaysian PS5 scalper turned scammer is caught already. So I think if you guys are hanging out in the PC groups, or the PS5 groups, you guys probably have seen this PS5 scalper scammer who managed to get like about 1.5 million ringgit. So yeah, so apparently part of the reason why he managed to scalp so many PS5s is apparently also because there are other scalpers buying from him to scalp further. So that's probably where a lot of the value came from as well. So according to the police reports, there are apparently 26 reports on the same person, and the total valuation is about 99,000 ringgit. So there's a lot of money, but it's not as near to the 1.5 million mark, which apparently is the true value, but some people just didn't report their own cases, which is kind of odd. I mean, if you got scammed, why wouldn't you report it? So yeah, I don't know why, but apparently yeah, he did manage to scam a lot of people out of their money for their greed to get the PS5. So with this, we would like to advise you guys to wait for our announcements, or Sony's announcements, which we will usually also cover as well, on when you can get the PS5s from official channels, so that you don't get scammed or scalped, or literally getting both at the same time, whereby you not only get charged more than the actual value, but you also get scammed out of your money, which is like so much pain. Some say it's around RM 2 million. Yeah, I think the value is probably higher than what's reported. I guess there are probably a lot of people who want a PS5. I mean, even personally, I am quite interested in the PS5. Even though I'm not a console player, I generally prefer gaming on PC. But the PS5 is, to be honest, quite an interesting product, because firstly is that it's more easily accessible than GPU nowadays, because obviously the situation surrounding PC GPUs, and it's now impossible to get one. But the PS5 is actually more accessible, and the prices are considered controlled, because unlike GPUs, which now you can get the 3070 for like 5,000, 6,000, a PS5 is only like still 2000 something on the official channels. So yeah, it's definitely a pretty interesting thing to get into, and it's a whole system, so you don't need to think whether you need to get the CPU, you need to get bottlenecks or whatever. Everything's, you don't have to worry about all that. You just put it in, buy the games, and you'll be gaming. And of course, I do want to play Ghost of Tsushima, but since that's coming to PC, maybe I don't need to buy a PS to play Tsushima, so that's a plus, I guess. But yeah, I feel sorry for the people who get scammed by the PS5 scalper, and hope that the police will do something to hopefully get them their refunds. I don't know whether they actually do that, but yeah. Next time you see a deal that seems too good to be true, it probably is. That's just the way the world works. And let's move on to the next one. Ghost of Sushi. Yes, the Ghost of Tsushima. The Tsushima. Yeah, that's probably, I think, the best game to come out on PS4 in the last year. Is it this year or last year? Last year, I think, right? Yeah, probably the most interesting game to me. Ghost of Sushi. And the next one is about GPUs. So Nvidia announces updated Nvidia image scaling for all games and Nvidia DLSS 2.3. So one thing that you have to know is that obviously AMD announced FSR back then, but FSR has to be implemented in the games. But Nvidia image scaling is technically something that is enabled on the driver level, so you don't have to get the game to implement it. Instead, the drivers can implement it. So what it does is that it sharpens the games, like sort of what FSR does. So basically, the data, you can have a lower quality render. Let's say you render your game at 720p, but you want to play a 1080p monitor. The GPU will do the scaling with the filters, with the algorithms, and then it will sharpen the detail so that you don't get that loss of detail, which usually happens when you try to push 720p to a 1080p monitor, or any other lower resolution to higher resolution monitor. So I'm actually in the midst of testing it, but I ran into some hiccups, which I'm currently in contact with Nvidia with. But yeah, it's generally something that every game can use as long as you have an Nvidia graphics card that is GTX 900 or newer, which is pretty much most of the recent GPUs that can play recent games, that this would be working on them. So we also covered like how you can use it, but I think the biggest thing is that Nvidia announced the SDK for this. So after this, game developers can choose to implement Nvidia image scaling on their games, which will open it up for both AMD and also Nvidia users. So similar to FSR, which is basically both of them are similar. They are both spatial upscalers, and so developers will have to choose between Nvidia image scaling or FSR to implement. I'm not sure whether there'll be any games that will implement both, but I think most of them will choose one over the other. So what Nvidia offers is probably a sharper quality, because apparently they use a 6-tab filter, which is sharper than AMD's FSR's 2-tab filter. So yeah, I haven't exactly seen them side by side, like what's the actual difference and whether it's like visibly different. But as long as you're using Nvidia graphics card now, you can use the updated Nvidia image scaling. And this thing is not actually new either, because it has been in the drivers for about 2 years now, although it was called something else back then. Yeah, so it was called image sharpening mode, image sharpening option. So yeah, it's something different, but actually it does the same thing. But now it's more clearer. They name it image scaling so that you know that it is meant for scaling up your image. And of course, Nvidia DLSS has also been updated to Nvidia DLSS 2.3, up from 2.2 back then. So Nvidia doesn't actually announce their upgrades every time, but when they do, usually it's something that is more, you get a bigger jump out of it. So previously, the biggest jump was Nvidia DLSS 2.0, which actually used a lot more of the AI features. And now 2.3, they take better use of the motion vectors to, give you a better and sharper image, especially when you have objects in motion. So one thing with DLSS is that it uses AI, and they actually process like 3 frames to give you one sharper image as you go. So that gives you that quality improvement without, losing performance, which a lot of times whereby you have that sharpening and whatnot, you get better performance, but your visual quality drops. With DLSS, you don't actually have that. And in some cases, actually with DLSS, you get sharper visuals, which I've noticed if you turn on DLSS, and you get the free performance, which is just something that we should do. But yeah, obviously DLSS 2.3 is only limited to Nvidia GeForce RTX GPUs, which there are only 2 generations of, the RTX 20 series and RTX 30 series. So yeah, it's a great technology, but still very few cards support it. Obviously, I think there are a lot of 20 and 30 series cards in the wild right now, But yeah, still you have to be one of the latest generations to be able to use this technology. So I think that is why they decided to give you Nvidia image scaling, so that you can use it across graphics cards and also across brands. So sooner or later, when Intel releases their graphics cards, obviously Nvidia image scaling would already work on them. And right now, AMD's graphics cards, you can use Nvidia image scaling, provided that it's implemented in the game. So if you already use Nvidia, it's obviously in the driver, so it works. But in the future, when it's implemented in the games, I would really like to see how well it competes against FSR, and more importantly is like which developers will choose FSR over Nvidia image scaling, or the other way around. Because yeah, obviously two technologies that do pretty much the same thing. Not sure which will they choose to implement. Obviously, I think they'll choose the one that's easier to implement, and I don't know which one is actually easier to implement. So yeah, we have to see for that. So there's a long list of Nvidia 2.3 games. Cyberpunk apparently was updated, but I did check on 16th. I didn't get the update. But the rest of it apparently do have that. Shadow of Tomb Raider, these are pretty interesting games. Shadow of Tomb Raider is actually especially interesting because it previously launched with Nvidia DLSS 2.0, I think 1 point something. Yeah, so it was the older version. Before now, they updated it further to give you better performance and better visuals. And Rise of the Tomb Raider is, I think, a 2016 or 2018 game, one of the years, a few years ago, and they decided to update the game with DLSS. So it shows that DLSS can be implemented in not only new games but also older games, and it probably isn't too hard to implement because yeah, their developers are willing to go back a few years to implement in an older game to give you those improved visuals and improved performance. When obviously a game that is like a few years ago, you don't really need the improved performance, but yeah, they can do it. That proves that it's probably easy to implement, or probably reasonably easy to implement. And yeah, they also shared a whole list of new DLSS games, including Battlefield 2042, which I already tried. I'm not really sure about what to feel about 2042, to be honest. And they also announced this Nvidia image comparison and analysis tool, which is probably something that's less for end users because it's meant to compare and analyze images or footage from your games, which I don't think most people do, but if you want to, you can. So you can compare, the graphic settings, the graphic quality, and see whether, let's say, like if you enable NIS versus you don't enable it, or enable DLSS and enable image sharpening, what happens. So those kind of things you can try and play around with without, because it's very hard, to be honest, to compare visual settings. Like let's say you're looking at this FSR and then you turn off FSR and look at it again, it's like you don't actually see anything. So yeah, this is probably something interesting if you want to do kind of thing, but I think it's probably more for reviewers and people who test games. If you are one of them, then yeah, I think this will be interesting to you. Can it make games smoother, laptop games smoother without upping the price? Technically, that's what DLSS can do. So if you have a Nvidia GeForce RTX laptop, let's say a 2060 laptop, you can enable DLSS and game at a more comfortable frame rate than with it running a native. Or same thing with Nvidia image scaling or FSR. That's basically what they're meant to do. So I do think that answers your question, because you can game on a cheaper laptop at a more acceptable experience and get a more acceptable experience compared to gaming at native. But obviously, if you have a 2070 or obviously a 30 series laptop, when you game with those same settings, you get higher frame rates. So yeah, I think it's just on what you really want. If you just want 60 frames per second, I think all these technologies are great for you. But if you want the sharpest, the best performance, obviously money is gonna be the main thing you need. Toss Bitcoin into wishing well. Yeah, you can, and hope for the thing to drop in price. Don't think possible to get refund. Yeah, I'm not exactly clear on that, whether does it actually work like that. So speaking of tossing Bitcoin into wishing well, I think we should wish for this thing to not happen. So apparently, the 13th Gen Intel Core Raptor Lake processors will use a new LGA 1800 socket, but apparently, the LGA 1700 socket has 1800 pins. So I haven't gotten to the point where I want to count the pins on my LGA 1700 motherboard. But yeah, apparently the Raptor Lake processors will use the LGA 1800, LGA 1700 socket. So you can put it in. I'm not sure whether you'll be losing features, but as far as I know, you won't be losing that many features because from what I have understood, is that the Raptor Lake, the 13th-gen Intel Core Raptor Lake processors will feature improved power delivery in the processor, so they have more power gates, I think. So that will be more efficient, and it's also going to have more efficient cores, the E-cores, and it's probably going to perform a lot faster. But I don't think they have new features like PCIe 5 or PCIe 6. I think there's nothing new in the area. So yeah, I don't exactly know why they need extra pins. But yeah, apparently that the Raptor Lake processors will have 18,000 pins versus 17,000 pins. 1800 pins versus 1700 pins that we have with the 12th gen processors. But they will still fit in the same socket. So if you bought an Intel Z690 motherboard, you don't really have to worry about it yet. But yeah, I don't exactly know why the Intel called the 1800 pin socket LGA 1700 in the first place. Win show off iPhone. My iPhone is down there. I haven't gotten to setting it up yet. So yeah. But if you want to see my iPhone, you guys can go check it out on my Instagram. But yeah, I haven't set up my iPhone yet, so I'm still using my Poco right now. I'm kind of lazy. Some of the accounts I don't really remember the passwords for, so I have to recover that first. But yeah, in any case, stay tuned. We'll be definitely doing more food coverage on the iPhone, and probably next week I can give you guys a quick hands-on experience of the iPhone, because for the first thing that I noticed with the iPhone is that when you unlock your phone, you have to go all the way from the bottom, which was confusing for me. More pin to hold down CPU when removing CPU. That would be AMD, because AMD has the PGA design. LGA doesn't actually hold down the pins, hold down the CPU, because yeah, you have the clamp. That's what I like about Intel, but apparently next gen AMD will do the same thing, so don't have to worry about that. And I think the last bit of news today, which ties back to the first bit of news, is the fact that MediaTek launched their Dimensity 9000 chipset. So what I think the Dimensity 9000 is probably a very interesting chipset, because one of the first things is that it's made on the 4nm node at TSMC. So instead of making it at Samsung, which is what Qualcomm and Samsung are doing, they're making it at TSMC, and it's actually the first TSMC 4nm processor even before Apple. So obviously Apple usually gets first dips to whatever TSMC has to offer, but apparently MediaTek is gonna do it first. So they're going to go with 4nm, and this actually is what I think allows them to deliver very interesting clocks. So aside from using the latest core architectures, the Cortex X2, Cortex A710 and Cortex A510, they actually clock them very high. So the X2 processor, X2 core, which is the main performance core, the main prime core, runs at 3.05 GHz, which is higher than whatever chip we have this year. Last year we had a 3.1 GHz on the Snapdragon 865 Plus, but yeah, this year we only have 2.995 from the Snapdragon 888 Plus. So yeah, there was a step downwards. So this is 3.05, and also the fact that the three Cortex A710 cores are actually running at 2.85 GHz, which is also really, really fast. And most of the Qualcomm designs generally run at 2.4 GHz. So this is something that's very interesting, and I do believe that this might be due to the fact of the TSMC 4nm node having a pretty good advantage over Samsung. But obviously we haven't seen the Samsung's latest gen processors, so we have to wait until Samsung's 4nm node processors come out from the Exynos 2200 and the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. I hope they don't go with that. I think they should just call it 898. 8 Gen 1 is too long. I'm lazy to type that. But yeah, I digress, and we have to wait until those come out and see what clocks they will run. But yeah, I think that the Dimensity will be one of the highest clocks chips for smartphones next year. Yeah, the phones that feature the Dimensity 9000 will be coming out next year. So they even compared it against the Apple A15 Bionic, and it ages it out in multi-core performance, but I think single-core performance will still see the Apple chip coming out ahead, because Apple's single-core performance due to their custom cores are very impressive. So why Apple will lose in the multi-core performance in smartphone is because they only have 6 cores. So it's a pretty obvious deficit there. And even then, the A15 Bionic is like very close when you see it. So I think that Apple probably is still very cool about it, because they've just made damn good chips. I don't know why. And also memory support on the Dimensity 9000 is the latest, most advanced one we have seen yet. So The current chipsets all support LPDDR5, and most probably next gen chips will probably support LPDDR5X. And the first one of them is obviously the Dimensity 9000 because it was announced the first. So it will support up to LPDDR5X 7500, which is not the maximum LPDDR5X speed, but it's still 17% faster than DDR5 LPDDR5 6400, which is the fastest we can get right now in our smartphones. And even then, it also has a 6MB system cache, which prevents the need for the CPU to shuttle data from the CPU to the RAM and shuttle it back, which usually involves latency and also higher power consumption. So with this system cache, they should be able to avoid that and probably save some power while increasing the performance. What a time to be alive, MediaTek better than Snapdragon. There were actually rumors of MediaTek outperforming Snapdragon while also being more efficient. So that would be something I would love to see, because obviously MediaTek has been always the underdog. They were never like pursuing the top notch in the market. So they always produce chips, like they're fast, they're good, but then it's not the fastest. They're more towards like value proposition. So this year, if they really come out with the Dimensity 9000 and they actually manage to match what Qualcomm and Samsung has to offer, I think it will be a very big change in the market for smartphones, which means that we have more choices to choose from. Obviously, MediaTek still has to work with the OEMs and also to make them pick their chips instead of Qualcomm, because obviously I think Qualcomm has worked with them for many years, so probably there's a better relationship there. I don't know, but yeah. But at least, we as consumers, we have more choice instead of, just when in the market right now, most of the time, if you look at a flagship, it's most probably only Qualcomm, because obviously with Exynos, I think there are only like 2 brands using it. Vivo, which they don't bring their Exynos smartphones into Malaysia, but Samsung, they do, and that's the only brand you can choose Exynos chips on. And with the previous rumor that, maybe it won't be coming to Malaysia, the Exynos 2200 might not make its way to Malaysia, so if there was no Dimensity 9000, we'll only be left with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. So yeah, this is a pretty good thing to come out from MediaTek. And yeah, the GPU is obviously upgraded. They are using the latest architecture. There are only 10 cores, but according to reports is that the 10 cores here are equivalent to last gen's 20 cores. So essentially, you're getting a pretty good performance boost. And according to MediaTek's own data, they are 35% faster than the Android flagship chipset, which I do believe is the Snapdragon 888, and also it's 60% more efficient, which is great news, because when you have a more efficient chipset in a smartphone, usually it means less power consumption, and with lower power consumption, you usually have less heat, which is probably the most important thing to have in a smartphone right now, because I think everyone don't feel like carrying a heat pocket warmer, unless probably in winter, which we don't have in Malaysia. So yeah, the other thing that is also supports ray tracing. So the G710MP10 GPU will support ray tracing, but this is a software ray tracing approach instead of hardware accelerated one, like what Samsung will most probably be doing with their Exynos 2200, because yeah, the RDNA 2 architecture does have ray tracing support. And yeah, they also compared it against the Apple phone, with it delivering like more consistent performance. But of course, I think this would probably have to see whether the actual device will have that kind of cooling, because a lot of times when they show this kind of graphs, the device is not actual device, it's like a developer device, which is not exactly reflective of what you get in a smartphone, something that you can buy in the market. And yeah, obviously aside from the chipset, aside from the memory, the CPU and the GPU, they also upgraded the AI, which is apparently up to 400% faster and 400% more efficient than last gen, and even beats out the Google Pixel 6 Google Tensor, which is actually a very AI focused chip. So yeah, this is something that if you think that this is important, yeah, this is kind of good. So the AI performance obviously will be also put to use for the camera. And they actually upgraded the ISP to have triple ISP, which can do 3 camera HDR at the same time. So this is quite interesting development, and also the fact they also upgraded the ISP to the APU communication. So the ISP can communicate directly with the APU, so that when you do like stuff like video recording and you want to do AI enhancement, AI enhancement, it can be done a lot faster without shuttling the data from the ISP to the memory to the ISP and then to the APU and then back. So that wastes time and that also wastes power. So now with this direct communication, you should be able to get lower latency and also better performance. And hopefully we can get like 60 frames per second HDR video, like what the Google Pixel 6 can offer. And yes, there's Wi-Fi 6E, 160 MHz. And apparently this is the first smartphone with Bluetooth 5.3. Although I still don't know what's the point of 5.3 when I don't even really see like any advantage of 5.1 or 5.2. And yeah, the last bit is the 4nm Note comment, which I think is probably the most interesting one. I don't know whether it will actually turn out because, yeah, we do know that TSMC's notes are usually better than Samsung's, but Samsung does have the advantage of being more affordable, more competitive in terms of pricing. So I don't know whether we'll actually see the Dimensity 9000 phones being costing more than, you know, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 phones, which would be an absolute mind-blowing thing. Yes, it gives you better performance, but you know, it's Dimensity. I think it would be a very interesting thing to see. The rumor is that you actually quite good looking. I think you might be. I don't know. I haven't seen you. Hey, what a lie. So yeah, that's about it for this week. 5 news which I think are quite interesting. Let's see. There's one. Oh yeah, Kurt Stylo. Apple being Apple, they are not about latest tech, it's about profit. They are about profit, but you know, their chipsets are really, really good. I mean, look at their A15 Bionic. Like, for example, I just said 6 cores matching 8 cores. And also the fact that, you know, they have the M1 Pro, M1 Max, they are actually beating out Intel and AMD's processors. So, while they do have a very healthy profit margin, they do give you what you pay for, I would say. Especially, I think, the iPhone 13 series with the cameras and stuff. So all of them now, this generation, they have that sensor shift technology, which is quite a bit more interesting than, you know, the current OIS that you get in the premium flagships with OIS. So most smartphone with OIS, they will have the lens moving, but instead in the Apple phones now, they move the sensor instead. So it's like what you get in pro cameras, which is very interesting. But obviously I haven't tested it out, so I'm not really sure whether it actually gives a good advantage or like, you know, it's just OIS. So yeah. One question, will PokdeLIVE be reviewing Realme Pad? I don't think I'll be reviewing the Realme Pad because we haven't been in touch with Realme for quite some time, but yeah. But yeah, I think what iForce is saying is correct. I heard that the UI is apparently very bad. It's apparently worse than the Mi Pad, and I personally think the Mi Pad is already not that great unless you want to use it just to watch movies or, yeah, generally watch movies. So yeah, I don't really recommend getting something like that. Play phone in bathtub, phone won't be so heaty. Yeah, I think you guys probably have seen, you know, those ads whereby they actually stick. I think Linus did it before. They got a plate, cold plate with heat pipes, water pipes, and then they connect it to the back of the phone, and it sort of became like water cooling. So true water cooling phone. So yeah, hopefully we won't need to get to that point because, I mean, smartphones are smartphones, you know, they should be cool enough for you to use. And while they are powerful, I don't think they need to be that powerful. Generally, that's one of the reasons why I think like mid-range smartphones today is probably a lot more interesting than flagships, because when you buy a flagship today, it gets so hot that you can game at the highest frame rate, but only for a short while before it gets hotter than a toaster and you have to put it down, or you know, you have to use like cooling solutions and whatnot. So mid-range, they don't really suffer from that issue. Yes, you don't get the full 60 frame, 90 frames per second gaming and whatnot, but they don't get so hot that you have to put it down, which is probably better than, you know, being fast but you have to put it down after some time because it just gets so hot. But yeah, I think that's my opinion. I don't know about you guys. Do you guys think that flagships is still interesting? I have always thought that the mid-range devices are more interesting than the true flagships, because with the flagship, yeah, every year you get better and better, but then, you know, the fact is that software is usually not there to catch up to what the hardware has to offer on the flagships. So for example, like you can see that we have a lot of Snapdragon 888 phones, you know, pushing 144Hz displays and whatnot, but the number of 144Hz games, number of 165Hz games is still generally not really there. But you know, when it comes to the mid-range, now when 120Hz is getting towards the mid-range segment as well, where you have, you know, 120Hz smartphones that are just quite affordable, like 1,000 something, below 2,000, And I think that will probably increase adoption of this kind of high refresh rate displays, and developers will probably see more reason for them to develop for this kind of displays, because flagships are probably not for everyone. I don't think everyone owns a flagship. Even I now don't own a flagship because I use a last gen flagship. So yeah, I think mid-range is probably the most interesting. But yeah, I think that's it for this week. I will see you guys next week. This week we'll be giving away one of these, so come back next week to see who wins. Yeah, bye bye.